Sadly, the church is in decline today.
If truth does not exist, we will not be able to live and function as civilized individuals in a society.
Students in the public education system at large of our nation are left with the impression God's irrelevant because he's never mentioned.
We sort of have national Alzheimer's. Here we are, the freest country that the world has ever seen, with more individual freedom and opportunity to choose what you want to do with your life and where you want to go to church. We have that, and we forgot how we got here.
So we're going to answer the question, why all the fuss?
Despite ever-increasing efforts to undermine the authority and accuracy of God's Word, the Bible stands firm.
Science and the Bible are inextricably linked.
We see evidence of incredible design.
God has made it incredibly clear.
Men, listen to me today. God has a calling on your life. Kids need you. Women need you. Our country needs fathers and responsible husbands today.
55 out of 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians.
We have the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. The Western world was successful because it was built upon biblical values.
Okay, you want to hear about dinosaurs? Everybody loves dinosaurs. So I'm going to talk about... I missed it, actually. Anyway, whatever happened to the dinosaurs? We find millions of their fossils, many of them in Montana. Even huge graveyards of dinosaurs, 10,000 duck-billed dinosaurs west of Shoto. Anyway, the evolutionists used dinosaurs to trap our kids. With millions of years, evolution, this beastie dinosaur evolved to that, and so forth and so on. And they catch a lot of young people this way. But we can use dinosaurs ourselves as missionary lizards because they're greatly designed. And many of the stories the evolutionists give can be shown to be wrong. Soft tissues. I'm going to get into this in more detail. And there's one challenging piece of evidence, and that is, how do we deal with millions of dinosaur tracks, millions of dinosaur eggs, and scavenged bone beds out there in the rocks? That's our challenge. Otherwise, when we look at just the observations and throw out their interpretations, which is what we should do as creation scientists, the data is on our side. Anyway, this is an overview of my talk. First of all, what is a dinosaur? And I'm going to go into problems for evolutionists. A lot of people out there in the culture don't think evolutionists have problems with dinosaurs or anything else. How did they go extinct? And this is the challenging data. This is the only challenging data that I know of. How are tracks, eggs, nests, and scavenged bone beds explained within the flood model? And then were dinosaurs on the ark? Anyway, what is a dinosaur? This is actually pretty easy. Essentially, a dinosaur, its legs are straight down versus a lizard that's out sideways. There's other differences, but that's one of the main differences between a dinosaur and a lizard. And there's plenty of lizards in the fossil record also. Anyway, there's an example of a sauropod. They give them different names, but it's generally the same beastie, a sauropod they call them. And then we have Pachycephalosaurus. Now, this is commonly what they say about these. They had big, thick heads, and they get the image that they're like bighorn sheep, and they would have used those thick skulls to bash each other. I mean, that's common what you see in textbooks or here, but in the last 15 years, they've realized that they did that. These dinosaurs weigh tons. They would crack their skulls open. So this is all fantasy. And then not all dinosaurs are huge. Here's the smallest dinosaur of all. And then we have marine reptiles. This is a mosasaur. It's considered the T-Rex of the ocean, of the pre-flood ocean. And then we have a lot of flying reptiles. They don't call these dinosaurs, by the way. They call them either this one a flying reptile. Anyway, those are the dinosaurs. Anyway, evolutionists do have problems, and there's three main ones I'm going to showcase. I thank Bruce Malone for embellishing on the third one there. But anyway, I'm going to go through these quickly. Where did dinosaurs come from? You know, they have all kinds of evolutionary stories of how it evolved from this beast, but every year it seems to change to a different beast. And anyway, I'm just going to summarize this quote here. Where did dinosaurs come from? That apparently simple question has been subject of intense debate among scientists for 150 years. Essentially saying, we really don't know where they came from. And that's exactly what we expect because of the gaps in the fossil record. Reptiles are reptiles, dinosaurs are dinosaurs, birds are birds. How could dinosaurs live near the poles? Yeah, they're finding a lot of dinosaur fossils and tracks at the higher latitudes. And this has caused almost a paradigm change to paleontologists. Anyway, here's a plot I did when I wrote my book on dinosaurs, Dinosaur Challenges and Mysteries. This is old now. It gets old quick. There's a lot more tracks and dinosaurs at high latitudes. My cursor show up? Yeah. That was one of the first dinosaur tracks ever found in Spitsbergen, about 80 degrees north. But there's tracks in Alaska, and there's dinosaurs in northeast Canada. In Greenland, there's dinosaur fossils and tracks that aren't there. So they lived at the polar areas. Oh, and then we go to the southern latitudes, and if we assume plate tectonics, Southeast Australia was within the Arctic Circle. They find a lot of dinosaur fossils in Southeast Australia. And they find some on New Zealand, and on the Chatham Islands, they find dinosaur fossils. Even in Antarctica, at 2 locations, they find dinosaur fossils. So this has really perplexed them. It's caused a problem for them, and there's a lot of great funny quotes about this. Here's one. Even if polar dinosaurs were able to subsist on poor quality food for some time, a photosynthetic crisis, that is darkness for 3 months or so, of some duration would have been fatal to them because even this food resource would have become exhausted. So, how do they explain it? Well, they really don't. And one that I should have added to this, they find a lot of dinosaur tracks in what they think are desert sands in the western United States. And these are a lot of times the big carnivorous dinosaur tracks they find. So you ask, what are dinosaurs going to eat in a desert? Especially when they're carnivorous. Anyway, maybe they weren't really desert sands after all. Maybe there were sands laid down in the flood, and that's where they died. So I'm going to go into the third one, which I thank Bruce Malone for embellishing on. I'm just going to touch on this really quick. The soft tissue is a major, major problem. And here's what they said at one time. It has long been assumed that the process of fossilization results in the destruction of virtually all original organic components of an organism. And it has been hypothesized that original molecules will be either lost or altered to the point of non-recognition over relatively short time spans, well under 1 million years. And that's common sense from biology before they discovered the soft tissue. And this is from the Museum of the Rockies. It's not there anymore, but they actually showed it. A blood vessel with red blood cells I mean, that has to be rapid fossilization to do that, and not that long ago, because bones and everything will decay in the soil within thousands of years. And here's a picture of red blood cells within a blood vessel, and stretchy tissue, protein molecules, bone cells. Anyway, this is a quote from her. Mary Schweitzer, who got a PhD from Montana State University. It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? Well, maybe those millions of years don't exist. Anyway, I'm going on to the third aspect. This is also a problem for evolutionists. Is how do they go extinct? They don't know what species they evolved from, and they don't know why they went extinct, because they were global. They even lived at the poles. So how in the world would they ever go extinct within their environmental ideas? Well, anyway, there's a lot of them. There's about 90 to 100 theories on this. I don't think there's any other aspect in evolutionary biology that has more theories than the extinction of the dinosaurs. Now, the origin of the Ice Age has about 60 theories, by the way, because they can't explain that either. That which is right in my field of atmospheric science, I might add. Well, anyway, some of these are very entertaining, but they're also very serious. Brains were too small. Other animals ate their eggs, like the mammals, who were evolving on the scenes. Disease or glandular disorders. This is serious. In other words, the plants evolved a little faster, and the dinosaurs eating the plants for the plant eaters, they couldn't digest the newly evolved vegetation, so they died out. And the plant eaters died out, the carnivorous dinosaurs are going to die out. And here's a far-fetched one: cosmic rays from a supernova, changes in the magnetic field of the Earth, a meteor impact. Now, the meteor impact was considered a long shot long ago, until 1980, when it was revived, and they found a crater in the Yucatan Peninsula about 180 to 200 kilometers in diameter that they think is the meteor that killed them off. But they have to get the times precise, and they can't do that because these dating methods are rather rough. So there's a lot going on here. And of course, changes in the climate all over the Earth. That's about 10 theories there. Anyway, those are some of the reasons, but here's the real reason. Their brains were too small. It's bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over, and we all have the brain about the size of a walnut. Oh. Anyway, the asteroid impact theory is now the theory that killed off the dinosaurs. It hit an area that had a lot of gypsum, and this would add a lot of SO2 into the stratosphere, combined with oxygen, and water vapor becomes sulfuric acid, and it would block the sunlight back to space. This is kind of how the Ice Age worked, by the way, too. It'd be called impact winter. So they died of the cold. But there's a lot of problems with this, because you have a lot of animals that are really sensitive to the cold that did not die out. The crocodiles, the turtles. So what gives? Well, they don't really know. And not only that, when they find these dinosaurs at polar latitudes, they obviously could take the cold, supposedly. So the asteroid impact theory has its own problems. And as this scientist said, Kevin Zonley says, everyone has their own favorite mechanism. We don't know the facts, so you can operate on your own intuition. You can kind of pick whatever you want. And that's kind of the status of it, even though most of them believe it's that big impact on the Yucatan Peninsula, which I believe is a real impact, but it happened during the flood. And I don't think it's responsible for the demise of the dinosaurs. That's the real reason dinosaurs went extinct. Young people never take up that habit. It's so addictive, it'll eventually kill you early. Anyway, hey, they haven't gone extinct. They've evolved to birds. In fact, if you go to the Museum of the Rockies, they'll show you a lot of some dinosaur fossils with feathers. Most of that, if not all, is imaginary. Anyway, I'm going to have a little fun with this. I think answers in Genesis for many of these slides, by the way. Anyway, before we get to that, we lack complete fossils of all intermediate stages between reptilian scales and the most primitive feather. To change a dinosaur into a bird is so radical of a change that it just blows your mind that they really believe that. And they do. And here's just one aspect. A reptilian scale has to come a feather. Well, they don't know how that happened. But if it's starting to change from scales to wings with little nubbins starting on their shoulders or their arms or something like that, you got to eventually try it out to see if you can fly, right? Okay, the first flight. Woo-hoo. It's actually impossible. So anyway, so every reason imaginable for the dinosaur extinction except the flood. And because I believe dinosaurs were on the ark, they didn't really go extinct at the flood, but 99.999% of them died in the flood. And when they describe dinosaur areas, they describe them in superlatives. We have a lot of them in big graveyards. In Montana, we have one of 10,000 duck-billed dinosaurs, all of the same species, with very few young dinosaurs, or practically all adults, which is rather interesting. But here's a graveyard from New Mexico, Coliphus graveyard. There's, they estimate 1,000 of these dinosaurs. It's about the size of Velociraptor, all mashed together. And anyway, when you read the descriptions of these, that they describe them as dying in huge floods, like John Horner and James Gorman in Digging Dinosaurs says, this was no ordinary spring flood from one of the streams in the area, but a catastrophic inundation. He's trying to explain those 10,000 duck-billed dinosaurs, all of the same species. Rather unusual for that to happen. Yeah, very unusual. Anyway, now I'm going to go on to the fourth topic, and this is the main challenging data for creation scientists and Bible believers. How did those tracks, those eggs, and then you find bones scavenged with their teeth of carnivorous dinosaurs broken off in the bone beds? How do we explain that? Well, now, this was considered one of the biggest earth science challenges to creation science at one time. And about 30 years ago, I decided to look at the data. See, as a creation scientist, I keep up with the contents of about 50 earth science journals in the Montana State University Library. So I know our challenges, but I have learned that I'm looking for the raw data because, they've done a lot of research and a lot of the data supports us, not them. So I can take the raw data, throw out those interpretations, the millions of years, evolution, uniformitarianism, which is slow processes over millions of years. I can toss all those. And so I have no trouble reading their material. 95% of the material I read is evolutionary material from their journals. So I took a look at this issue, and there's a dinosaur track. This is from northeast Wyoming. And this is a small carnivorous dinosaur, like Velociraptor. And there's eggs. These are from Mongolia. These are some of the first ones found. In fact, these were found in 1922, I think. And then they never saw any tracks or dinosaurs or eggs for dozens of years until the late 1980s. And now they find them over much of the earth, these features. to the point where there's millions of dinosaur tracks and millions of dinosaur eggs. And here's a scavenged bone found in the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. I have special permission to go up there and look at this fabulous dinosaur location spot. Anyway, this is a bone that's been scratched by the teeth of a carnivorous dinosaur. And here's the tooth of a carnivorous dinosaur in a bone bed. But when you only find the teeth and not the rest of the carnivorous dinosaur, you realize it was scavenged, because when they scavenge, their teeth break off and then they grow back. So we need to explain that. And they had explained it over millions of years of living in a natural habitat and so forth. Anyway, I looked at some of these features in details. I found a number of unusual track features. First of all, tracks of likely poor swimmers are rare. You hardly find any tracks of Stegosaurus and Chylosaurus and Triceratops, which you'd imagine just by their shape would be poor swimmers. And practically all the tracks are from adults and older juveniles. Where are the babies? When they have catastrophes in Africa that cover up tracks, they usually find a lot of baby tracks and young tracks there too. But they're practically all missing from the fossil record. Maybe the babies couldn't escape an encroaching flood, but the adults could for a while. That's kind of the ideas were coming in my mind. And this one especially got my attention. Trackways are practically always straight. Now, I hunt elk, and when I'm hunting elk in the snow, they go all over the place, and they mingle, and it's a mess sometimes. But the only time I see straight tracks is when I spook them, and they go off in a straight line. So straight. Maybe they were escaping some big catastrophe. And these are global, so some kind of global catastrophe. Maybe we have something here. And also, when you see tracks, they're practically all on a flat bedding plane. They don't seem to go up any hills or any other bedding planes, as if they were making tracks at a beach. And that's a lot of times how the secular science describe them, especially when they suddenly find tracks in the middle of what they considered ocean sediments, like limestone. Suddenly there's a beach in the middle of all that limestone that they quickly make tracks. But they're practically on flat bedding planes. And when you see tracks in layers maybe separated by 200 feet of strata, sometimes the tracks are the same in these different layers, like in northeast Wyoming. And in this one location, it's 3 million years. And they're the same type of dinosaur early on, and then 3 million years later. How probable is that in the same location, 3 million years later? Well, maybe it's because it's rapid deposition, and they came back to that area because they weren't far away. And then, tracks claimed from many deserts. I've already gone into that. Anyway, here's a trackway. There's actually 5 tracks in a straight line here. There's 3 of them. 2 of them have been eroded. So I concluded that the reason this can be explained is because of the flood. I'll get into that, but I got to talk about eggs. We find millions of egg fossils now. And nests, we find hardly any nests that has holes in the ground. They're very rare. There's one in Montana on what's called Egg Mountain. If anyone's been there, it's only a hill about 50 feet tall. No vegetation associated with this, And the key thing is that these eggs are very porous. You can't they can't be on flat bedding planes, which they practically all are, because the embryo would die quickly because they're very porous. They'd dry out. So this told me, man, they had to lay these eggs quickly, possibly because it's some catastrophe going on. Anyway, I developed this idea. It's called the beds hypothesis. Flat bedding planes. Bed stands for briefly exposed alluvial sediments. Briefly exposed alluvial sediments. How does this work? Well, we practically always find these tracks in areas of thick sedimentation. Western United States has lots of them, lots of sedimentary rocks below them, and evidence a lot of sedimentary rocks used to be above them that got eroded down during the recessional stage of the flood to the level we find the tracks. And why do we have briefly exposed alluvial sediments? Because sea level in the flood isn't going to just go up gradually and go down gradually. We have a lot of processes going on during the flood. The more I study the flood, the more I realize how complicated and catastrophic it is. Anyway, sea level would oscillate up and down. It's rising, but it's going up and down like this. And as I have a diagram I'll show you. So when you have a local drop, you expose a bedding plane for maybe 100 miles. And here, suddenly there's land and dinosaurs floating in the water. See, oh, there's a place where I can land. I'm getting tired of swimming. So it gets up on the land, makes tracks. Pregnant dinosaurs have to get rid of those eggs they've been holding. And then some dinosaurs don't know they're going to die soon, so they want to eat. So they scavenge the bone beds. And then our local rise covers it up. See, we have to preserve all this stuff like tracks. Tracks are ephemeral. We have to preserve tracks. And we have to cover them up and bury them rapidly, which we can do when we get the flood level, sea level, as we call it, rising and covered with mud and bury it. Anyway, here's kind of a schematic, different time frames. This is just like a block diagram, but think of it maybe 100 miles area, but it's just a cutaway to kind of illustrate the point. In time one, thick sedimentation. That's generally where we find dinosaur tracks, and areas of thick sedimentation. And it's filling in rapidly. Time two, you've almost filled in most of it below the floodwaters. Time three, we reach close to the surface of the floodwaters. Oh, it's very shallow. Oh, then a local drop exposes those bedding planes. And then dinosaurs can embark on them either from higher ground nearby or trying to swim, make tracks, lay eggs, and eat dead dinosaurs. And then a rise covers them. So that's how it works. And here's a little schematic. I thank my artist, Melanie Richard, Billings, Montana, for drawing this. And anyway, yes, flood level drops. Suddenly there's an area, maybe 100 square miles, and they lay eggs, make tracks, and then suddenly it rises again, and it's, of course, muddy sediments. It's not clear water, and it covers up all that stuff to preserve it for this time. In this case, the dinosaurs hang on, but other cases they can be driven off, and then they can come back to the same area. So you can have actually these features in an area at different levels, which we see. So that's how it works. And there's at least 5 mechanisms that cause the level of the floodwaters to oscillate. Lunar tides is one of them. I'm not going to go into these in detail. Lunar tides. Anyway, they've been going up and down at a lot of different scales. So I'm not going to embellish on any more of those. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the last topic, were dinosaurs on the ark. Dinosaurs on, well, to qualify to be on the ark, you had to breathe air and live on land. Did dinosaurs before the flood breathe air and live on land? I'd say so. So God would be obligated, if I can use that word, to bring 2 of each kind of dinosaur on the ark. Now, he doesn't have to bring the big sauropods on the ark. He can bring some babies or young ones, so they wouldn't take up much room. And there's only about 50 kinds of dinosaurs. So that you only need 100 dinosaurs on the ark. And because, there's 1,000 named dinosaurs, but a lot of times when they see a bone and it kind of goes a little like this way, hey, it's a different species automatically. So the splitters have been crazy in naming all kinds of dinosaurs, but in general, there's only 50 kinds of dinosaurs. And here is one kind, the ceratopsians. Now, Triceratops up on the upper left is just one type of these horned dinosaurs, but there's different types with different bone structures, all probably of the same species, but we'd use kinds because species is a pretty vague biological classification thing. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I think there's about 20 definitions, I've been told. And anyway, this is some of the variety of ceratops. Now, they would define these as different species, but they're probably the same kind. So, they survived the flood. I think answers in Genesis a second time for many of these illustrations. Anyway, we have evidence of dinosaurs living after the flood, like this Bishop Bell's tomb that looked like two sauropods in his tomb. And then we have pictographs and other features that indicate live dinosaurs. And we have all these dragon legends globally. Chinese especially have them, but you know, a dragon is essentially an embellished dinosaur. Add a little fire. I mean, it's essentially a dinosaur. So probably they got the dragon legends from dinosaurs that lived after the flood. And the flag of Wales is a dinosaur. So these are global features of these dragons. And then when you look in the Bible, you get these strange creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. And translators have been totally flummoxed on what these creatures are because they don't understand creation science. Anyway, Job 40:15, look at Behemoth, which I have made along with you, and which feeds on grass like an ox. Oh, he ate grass. Yeah, you know, they didn't think grass didn't evolve until well after the dinosaurs died out. They believed that at one time. But guess what? They found grass in the stomach of one of these beasts. Anyway, now here's what they translate. It says, he moves his tail like a cedar, possibly the hippopotamus or the elephant, the NIV Study Bible says. Does that remind you of a cedar? What about that tail? That's a hippo tail. Come on. But you know, that's all they got because they can't imagine dinosaurs living after the flood. There's a cedar tree from Australia. And there's a tail that might remind you of a cedar tree. Does it belong to that beast? How about that beast? How about a sauropod dinosaur? Yeah, so Behemoth probably was a sauropod dinosaur. And Job goes on, his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like rods of iron. There's the leg bone of a sauropod. That reminds you of that verse in Job. Anyway, he's the chief of the ways of God. And I'd say the sauropod probably would fit that beast, the chief of the ways of God. And of course, the Ice Age occurred after the flood. Probably many of them died in the flood or went south to the lower latitudes. But anyway, the climate was a lot different after the flood than before the flood. We had a universal warm climate before the flood. And some of my research shows why, because we have over 10 times this amount of carbon in the coal that were pre-flood plant matters than we do today, indicating 10 times as much trees. And trees give off water vapor called transpiration. Water vapor is probably 75% of the greenhouse effect. So with more water vapor, we're going to be warm. And of course, I'm going to be talking about the subject of global warming this afternoon. Anyway, the Bible explains dinosaurs, created with great design, mostly died in the flood. Those leaving the ark struggled, and man ended up finishing them off, if they really are dead. Some people think they're still alive in spots like the Congo. And we can explain the challenging data, the only challenging data, by the Beds model. The Bible explains dinosaurs while evolutionists have many problems. Therefore, it is easy to believe the whole Bible, which tells us how to live here on earth and how to go to heaven. I'm going to skip that. Anyway, 50 years of research. I'm a researcher, essentially. And I've developed a lot of resources, and Dinosaurs is just one of them. It has a new cover. Anyway, Dinosaur Challenges and Mysteries. And in this book, I talk not only their problems, a lot of people don't know, but also how we explain the tracks, eggs, scavenged dinosaurs, the lack of nests, etc. That's the resource that essentially embellishes on this talk. And I've written kids' books because we want to teach creation science. We have the data. We have the observations. We want to teach it to young people. So I've written 5 children's books, and one of them is on dinosaurs. And this is a series, Mr. Hibb, an Intelligent Grasshopper. And it's a cartoon explaining dinosaurs, easy to read for young people and adults alike. Exploring Dinosaurs with Mr. Hibb. And since I've worked on the Ice Age for 50 years, I did a compendium of practically all my research in this book, How Noah's Flood Caused a Single Ice Age. It was recently published. And people were really challenged when they got this ice core data from Antarctica and Greenland, where they claimed there's 100,000 annual layers we see in the ice, and it's like counting the rings in a tree to determine the age to 100,000 years. And the ice in Antarctica is over 800,000 years old. Well, how do we explain that? Well, this is a layman-friendly version of another book that was technical that I wrote with ICR years ago, The Frozen Paradox. This goes into how do we explain ice cores from our worldview. And by the way, the Lord has led me in my research to answer their challenges. That's why I got into the dinosaur eggs and tracks. Not necessarily to bash evolution, which after graduate school I found that was really easy. I was amazed on how easy it was. In fact, I can run simple probability and show that one step in evolution could not occur in trillions of years by simple probability. So I don't have much stuff on evolution. In fact, I borrowed a resource from CMI when I go out and talk that deals with evolution, because I don't usually deal with that, because I deal with the challenging data, ice cores, the Ice Age, dinosaur tracks, eggs, and so forth. And anyway, this is one on what happened to the woolly mammoths and the Ice Age. This is an early layman-friendly version. Oops. And like I said, we want to teach these concepts to children. So my wife and I developed a fun story of a 12-year-old boy living south of the Ice Age in a cave. He's caveman, but they're very smart, and they have a fun time with Neanderthals, which is just another people group. And do they go elk hunting like we do? No, they go woolly mammoth hunting. So a lot of adventure stories from the eyes of a 12-year-old boy living in a cave. And teaching about the Ice Age in the process of having a fun story. And we did a sequel on this, uncovering the mysterious woolly mammoths in story form to explain all that mammoth data. Millions of mammoth bones are in the permafrost in Siberia and Alaska, in the lowlands. And of course, Kyle Justice did these amazing DVDs. This is just not a lecture. This is showing you the things out in the field of the Northwest states for the Ice Age, and I got 2 others in the Lake Missoula flood and the runoff of the floodwaters. Great DVDs and fun. And when I first got into this, I realized that we're weak in geology. You know, I find that in biology, you can show evolution untrue really easy, but it's geology where they really put it over on us. And this is where it started in the Enlightenment. They threw out Noah's flood. And they brought up present processes over millions of years to explain everything, which actually I'm finding out doesn't hardly explain anything. But that's what they did. And suddenly the earth became millions of years overnight because of that idea. And so it's geology where it's hard for people to get into this, to really show how millions of years and evolution aren't true. So Robert Carter and I wrote this book, Biblical Geology 101, to teach you a little bit about geology so you yourself can go out when you travel and you can see flood features, but you got to tune your mind to it or you don't see them at all. That's what this is about. And then we had to write something for young people about geology, Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibbs, a fun cartoon going through geology. And this book is probably, I thank Bruce Malone for kind of embellishing on this book, essentially. A lot of those concepts he talked about and more are in this book. Now, this book is written for laymen with no science background because we have some really technical books on dating methods, by the way. And we have some layman's books, but the layman's books are too complicated. I was told that by a pastor, so I determined to fill in that gap in knowledge to explain millions of years from someone with no science background. Lots of references if you want to dig. And so that's what that resource is all about. And I'm going to leave you with this final verse. Your faith should not rest on the wisdom of man. That's evolution, millions of years. But on the power of God. God can do a flood. He can create in 6 days, 6,000 years ago. No sweat. That's where our faith should lie, not on the so-called wisdom of man. And so I thank you.